On July 30th, 1945, a Japanese submarine torpedoed an American warship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Nearly 1,200 men went into the water. For almost 5 days, nobody came looking for them. By the time rescue finally arrived, only 316 men were still alive. The rest died from exposure, dehydration, and shark attacks. The ship was the USS Indianapolis. It had just completed a top-secret mission, delivering parts for the atomic bomb that would be dropped on Hiroshima days later. The Navy knew the ship was missing. Nobody acted on it for days. Then, after the disaster, the Navy court marshaled the ship's own captain for the loss of his vessel. To understand how this happened, you have to start with the mission itself. In late July 1945, the USS Indianapolis completed a high-speed, top-secret delivery to the island of Tinian. It was carrying components of the atomic bomb later used on Hiroshima, though the crew themselves did not know exactly what they were transporting. The mission was considered so urgent that the ship traveled alone at high speed without waiting for an escort convoy to form. After the delivery, the ship was ordered to sail toward the Philippines, unescorted, through waters known to have Japanese submarine activity. Captain Charles McVay requested an escort ship. His request was denied. Navy Command determined an escort was not necessary for this route. He was also not informed that Navy intelligence had already tracked Japanese submarine activity along that exact path in recent days. Just after midnight on July 30th, a Japanese submarine, the I-58, fired 2 torpedoes into the Indianapolis. The ship sank in 12 minutes. Roughly 300 men died in the initial explosion and sinking. Almost 900 men made it into the water alive. They had life jackets, but there were not enough life rafts for everyone. The ship went down too fast to send a confirmed distress call. And even if one had gone out clearly, virtually no one was expecting the Indianapolis to be anywhere in particular at that specific time. This is the part that would later cause outrage. The Navy had no reliable system in place for tracking whether major ships arrived at their destinations on schedule. The Indianapolis was due to arrive in the Philippines on July 31st. It never showed up. Nobody flagged this as a problem for days. 3 separate naval stations reportedly picked up distress signals from the ship. None acted on them. Officers later claimed the messages were dismissed as a possible Japanese trick or simply not taken seriously enough to investigate. Meanwhile, in the water, the surviving sailors faced a slow and horrifying ordeal. Sharks began arriving within the first day, drawn by blood in the water from the wounded and the dead. Survivors later identified the sharks as primarily oceanic whitetips, a species known to aggressively target anything floating at the surface. Men clustered together in tight groups, trying to keep the injured and the weakest sailors toward the center, away from the edges where sharks would strike first. The sun caused severe dehydration. Many men, driven mad by thirst, drank seawater, which accelerated organ failure and hastened death. Survivors later described watching men around them disappear one at a time, pulled under without warning, sometimes only a scream, marking that someone was gone. Estimates suggest sharks killed dozens, possibly more than 100, of the men who had survived the initial sinking. The men were finally spotted by accident, not through any search effort. On August 2nd, a Navy plane on a routine anti-submarine patrol happened to spot an oil slick. Then bodies and survivors scattered across miles of open ocean. Rescue ships were scrambled immediately once the discovery was made, but by then, the men had already been in the water for nearly 5 days. By the time rescue operations finished pulling survivors out, only 316 of the nearly 1,200 men originally aboard the Indianapolis were still alive. It remains the single largest loss of life from one ship in the history of the U.S. Navy. In the aftermath, the Navy needed to explain how this had happened. Rather than focusing on the failure to track the ship or respond to distress signals, the Navy court-martialed Captain Charles McVay. He was charged with failing to zigzag his ship, a maneuvering technique meant to make submarine targeting harder. In an unusual move, the Navy brought the Japanese submarine commander, Mochitsura Hashimoto, to the United States specifically to testify against McVay. Hashimoto testified that zigzagging would have made no difference. He stated plainly that he could have sunk the ship, regardless of the maneuver. McVay was convicted anyway. He became the only U.S. Navy captain ever court-martialed for the loss of his ship following an enemy attack in the entire war. Many surviving crew members were outraged, believing McVay had been made a scapegoat to protect the Navy from scrutiny over its own failures in tracking the ship and responding to the distress signals. McVay received hate mail for decades from families of the men who had died, some blaming him personally for their loss. He took his own life in 1968. For decades afterward, the case remained largely a footnote in naval history, known mostly through survivor reunions and a chilling monologue in the 1975 film Jaws, where a fictional character retells the sinking and shark attacks in graphic detail. That scene introduced the story to a generation who had never heard of the Indianapolis. The push for McVay's official exoneration eventually came from an unlikely source. In 1996, an 11-year-old middle schooler named Hunter Scott began researching the Indianapolis for a school history project after watching that same Jaws scene. His research turned into a multi-year campaign, including interviews with dozens of surviving crew members, and he eventually testified before Congress himself, arguing McVay had been wrongly convicted. In the year 2000, Congress passed a resolution stating McVay's court-martial conviction should be set aside. In 2001, the Secretary of the Navy formally amended McVay's record to reflect that he was exonerated for the loss of the Indianapolis. The exoneration came 33 years after McVay's death and 55 years after the sinking itself. The men who survived the sharks and the water were left for decades watching their captain carry the blame that should have belonged to the system that lost track of their ship in the first place.